fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship.
Welcome, friends, to Season 1 of Gilligan's Island, Goofs, Errors, and Oddities. I am author David Calderola, and please don't be upset at me for throwing in this quick plug for my latest book, as well as my other YouTube videos before we start. Very quickly, here they are. There, you see, that wasn't so bad. Now, as to the series. Allow me to say that I absolutely love the Gilligan's Island TV show. I was born in 1959, so I was only 5.5 years old when the show started, and a month away from my 8th birthday when it ended. The 60s was a tough time to be a young adult because of the war in Vietnam, but it was a great decade to be a kid. It was a joy to watch great shows like Gilligan's Island, Beverly Hillbillies, Outer Limits, The Twilight Zone, The Munsters, The Addams Family, Dark Shadows, Batman, and Star Trek, to name just a few, and to watch each new episode as they aired for the first time. But even so, as the years passed by with each viewing of the reruns of Gilligan's Island, I began to notice some mistakes being made regarding storyline, continuity, or errors in filming. At first, I didn't think much of it, as it was a comedy family show that wasn't meant to be taken too seriously. But over the years, more and more gaffes began to show up, so much so that I decided it was time to chronicle them in this documentary. Some of these goofs have already been offered over the internet, but I guarantee you, I have caught far more goofs, errors, and oddities than you have. I'm not bragging, because I have the proof right here. Now, naturally, the first season isn't so bad, as most breaks in continuity occur when a subsequent episode doesn't agree with an earlier episode. And I confess it was difficult at times determining what should be included and what should not. For instance, when the castaways tried to secure a rescue by making a black and white and silent movie, the scenes in the end product often do not match the scenes they originally shot. Now, if I wanted to, I could point out a dozen inconsistencies where this is concerned, but it's understood that the finished product is not meant to accurately mirror the shooting scenes, and this is intentional so that the finished film will be sillier and funnier than the shooting scenes the audience has already viewed. Also, the first few times I tried to record an off-the-cuff live explanation of the images you'll be looking at, each narration lasted from a total of 42 to 50 minutes, a bit too long, so I have had to resort to scripting narration to pick up the pace. So, without further ado, hop on your ascot, grab your teddy, ain't that right, Teddy? Yeah. And let's start Season 1. We start with the minnow beginning its fateful trip. You can see the skipper and Gilligan steering the vessel topside, with Mrs. Howell, Mr. Howell, and the 3 people who eventually become Ginger, the Professor, and Mary Ann, 2 crew and 5 passengers. But if you look closely, you will also see an 8th person. It seems that someone forgot to tell the man who owns the boat and is really steering it to duck out of sight for a few seconds. Also notice the overhead loft that Skipper and Gilligan are standing in. But when the weather started getting rough and the tiny ship was tossed, the little model boat in the studio tub has no overhead loft. No Skipper and Gilligan to steer the ship. But oddly enough, if you look closely at the boat's windows, it looks like they pasted a picture of Alan Hale with his skipper's hat on in the window. Of course, the next scene, though, shows the Skipper and Gilligan in the loft. Now, the island used in this distance shot is an island called Coconut Island, the smallest of the Hawaiian Islands. As you can see, its tallest inhabitants are the palm trees, and I'll come back to that later. As the skipper awakens, you can see the original 3 actors that didn't make it into the regular series. Most people have caught this too, but if you're going to change actors and not reshoot the opening scene, I'm going to call you on it. We're not far into the pilot episode where the tiny island shows off one of its many cliffs and mountains, but Coconut Island has no mountains. This scene shows what many people spotted already. The passengers are listening to the report of their demise on the radio. The professor is seated, but when they mention his name on the radio, he is standing with his hands on his hips. Also note the beautiful hills in the background. The scene continues with the professor seated again. Well, the skipper and Gilligan head out to sea on a raft to fetch help. The raft is attacked by sharks, and Gilligan pulls out a pocket knife. To fight off the sharks with? No, for some strange reason he begins to cut the vines that hold the raft together. It's a good thing I wasn't the skipper, because I would have chucked Gilligan overboard and fed him to the sharks for trying to scuttle the raft. Well, the sharks are gone, and there's just enough raft left to keep them afloat, but when the raft sinks anyway, and the skipper and Gilligan make it to shore, the skipper asks Gilligan what he has. Gilligan says he saved the raft. I thought I would include these shots to show that Gilligan isn't simply a lovable ne'er-do-well, but is actually insane, and you'll see this throughout the series. Here we have Marianne running towards the professor and Ginger. Another shot of a lovely mountain in the background that is a bit taller than the palm trees of Coconut Island. The point I'm trying to make is, if you're going to show so many mountains, why not take that distant shot of Gilligan's Island with a larger island that has at least a few hills on it? As the series continues, you're going to see how the most undefined element of the show is the island itself. Here the castaways have built the community hut. Naturally, it has a dirt and sand floor, yet it floats in the lagoon. Earlier during the storm, Thurston says, "Lovey, if anything happens, I want to thank you for 15 of the happiest years a man ever had." To which Lovey replies, "Thurston, we've been married for 20 years. To which Thurston remarks, "I know, but the last 5 years have been a little shaky." So we know that the Howells have been married 20 years. This comes up again in the first season and again in the second season, as you will see. Gilligan is standing watch and he hears noises coming from the supply hut that was recently plundered. The vicious creature attacks Gilligan, and I have to say that this is the cheapest dummy they could have come up with. Its head looks like a stuffed sock, more like the hood of a ninja rather than the chimp that has terrorized the island. In this episode, the skippers dreamed of his World War II days when he converted the receiver into a transmitter. In order to induce him to remember what he did to make that happen, the professor has hypnotized him, and at this point, he tells the castaways to make battle noises. Lovey is standing with her hands apart while she blurts out, "Bang, bang, bang." When the scene goes to a close-up of Gilligan, Lovey's hands are folded across her midsection. Yes, she's still going bang, bang, bang. When the scene returns to the first angle, her hands are apart again while she continues to bang away. At the end of the Wrong Way Feldman episode, Wrong Way flies into the wild blue yonder, but the editor left too much of the stock footage in at the beginning, which shows a good part of Southern California below. In this episode, the Howells are tasking Gilligan with the building of a simple palatial estate. They have several bamboo poles planted to mark the boundaries, one of which has a fake bill on it that has been pushed through the top of the pole, but the close-up shows a real dollar bill taped to the top. Now this is preposterous even for Gilligan's Island, especially when Gilligan tells Marianne in a later episode when he's tying up the clothesline that sailors know how to tie all kinds of knots. Big knots, small knots, itsy-bitsy, teeny-weeny, transistor Japanesey knots, etc. Here the minnow, which was repaired with Gilligan's superglue made from pancake syrup, begins to fall apart. Now, even in this island of fantasy land, it makes no sense for the undamaged boards to start popping loose. There are production crew members pulling on strings to make the boards pop out like this. Gilligan, who disassembled a healthy raft, now runs aboard the minnow and tells the skipper, "Don't worry, skipper, I'll hold it together for you." He disassembles a working raft, but when the boat disassembles itself, he charges on board to hold it together. I told you he was insane. As the Howells react to the boat falling apart, you can see one of the strings the production crew are pulling on to pop the ship's boards out with. One might think that they could have had the Howells in front of the string so it wouldn't be so noticeable, but it is more likely that they have two cameras shooting at the same time. But if that is the case, why not have a second camera take the close-up of Gilligan so they wouldn't get the shot with Lovey standing behind him with her hands folded? Well, the ship completely disassembles. The point here is, if you are going to do something so extreme, something that is a quantitative change to the reality of living on the island, then you have to stick to it. But the minnow seems to keep putting herself back together in later episodes. It would be like having the skipper lose an eye in an episode, which means he's going to have to wear an eye patch for the rest of his life. But with the start of the next episode, he has both eyes, and everyone is pretending that the accident in the previous episode never happened. If you commit to such a significant change, you have to abide by it. Now this is just a pet peeve of mine, but considering all of the great work the prop department is doing with bamboo huts and furniture and the like, one would think they could do better for Mrs. Howell's 1-pound diamond ring than a glass doorknob. Well, now the skipper has dug up Kona, the god of evil. You can see over Gilligan's left shoulder a rack that has some bamboo logs on it. As the earth shakes, the logs fall to the left. After a brief shot of the skipper, the scene returns to Gilligan and the professor, and the logs are up again and falling to the right. After a fade out and a fade in, the logs are back up and they eventually fall left again. Well, Gilligan, as the great Watubi, has healed the skipper of his curse, proclaiming he actually has the power. Mr. Howell tests him by asking for a cool breeze on that terribly hot day. Gilligan commands a breeze, and of course nothing happens, for a second or two, and then they turn on the big studio fans. As Gilligan prepares to take hold of the nearby palm tree, you can see that the fans have blown the fake ground cover up, revealing one of the braces of the stand that holds the fake tree trunk up. Well, at least they caught this because you can see that they tacked down the ground cover for the rest of the shot. In this episode, the castaways are running out of fresh water. Gilligan goes for a drink, but the water doesn't flow if he's not pedaling. Kinda makes you wonder about that freshwater waterfall that's always running at the lagoon. Anyway, the skipper goes to talk to Gilligan. You'll notice the skipper's shirt is a mid-ranged light gray as it appears in a black and white episode. But when he speaks with Gilligan, his shirt is dark gray, almost black. When he is finished, his shirt is light again. This is not a unique event here. In a number of the first season black and white episodes, the skipper's shirt changes from light to dark and back again. I thought that maybe they wanted him in the dark shirt for exterior sunlit scenes and the lighter shirt indoors to strike a balance. But why do that only for the skipper? Also, this whole scene was shot indoors, so why change shirts? Sometimes I think they are intentionally messing with our minds. Here's a common segue. The minnow beached. But the minnow was destroyed, wasn't it? In the Japanese sailor episode, the skipper ponders what to do next. The waterfall is in the background. Now, Sherwood Schwartz mentioned in interviews that they had fire trucks or water tankers supplying the little waterfall with water. It seems though that they may have run fire hoses along the sides of the waterfall to pump water at key points to keep the flow looking natural and even. But here, one of those hoses, or the fixture at the end, seems to be leaking as it's spraying water forcibly. Gilligan enters the sub, which almost sinks. The stuntman's head has just submerged under the water, but he kicks around in the water and you can see his shoes pop up over the surface. Gilligan can't read Japanese, so he is steering the sub in circles, as can be seen as the periscope is going in circles. Unfortunately, the scuba diver who's pushing the prop periscope gets too close to the surface and his air tank emerges. There is buried treasure on the island, and there is need for a court trial to determine the owner. The honorable professor will preside in black robes with a bench and gavel, and an American flag behind him with all 42 stars on it. This is the episode with Larry Storch from F Troop playing bank robber Jackson Farrell. In the brief segue between scenes, someone's shoulder can be seen. If I had to guess, I would say it's probably Alan Hale's. Mr. Howell offers Jackson Farrell a check for what he says is $100,000 if Farrell will help rescue them. Of course, he's written this check on a piece of driftwood. Farrell exclaims, "It says $10,000. Mr. Howell says, "No, that's a bit of seaweed," and he flicks the false comma off. But either way, a 1 with 6 zeros is $1 million. Notice also, after the 1 and the third 0, there appears to be commas that were erased, suggesting they intended to make the offer $1 million, but for some reason changed their minds. Notice also in the inset image from the gold mine episode, where Mr. Howell is trying to rent the skipper and Gilligan's picks and shovels, he breaks out his checkbook. If he has his checkbook on the island, why write out a check on driftwood? Now this is just a bit of trivia. In the episode where a missile is launched down the South Sea Missile Range under the name of Operation Powder Keg, we see the general talking with an officer on his right, who is actor Harry Lautner. About a dozen years earlier, Lautner played the part of Atlasan, an officer and a rocket ship pilot on the early 50s TV show Rocky Jones Space Ranger. I just thought it was interesting that the only Gilligan's Island episode Harry Lautner appeared in was one that was about a rocket launch. Well, the skipper and professor are about to signal the search plane with the professor's handmade mirror, which has a rounded perimeter. Gilligan grabs the vine, swings down, and crashes through the mirror. Notice that all the pieces are now straight-edged. The stock footage of the missile is actually one of a missile going up, not down. They just turned the picture upside down. As you can see, a missile has a simple shape: a cylindrical body, conical nose, and a few fins at the back. But when the missile lands in the lagoon and beaches itself, we see a very bizarre, more complex structure. It would have been easier to duplicate the real missile's actual shape. Yet, while the outside is more ornate than necessary, the interior is cheap and cheesy looking. Even when I first saw this as a child, I refused to believe any missile could be so shoddy inside. Why gussy up the outside unnecessarily and then go cheap on the inside? Maybe they borrowed the rounded mirror and the rocket from a local amusement park. Gilligan discovers a jungle boy played by 14-year-old Kurt Russell. Naturally, one can't expect him to be running around the stage butt naked, but notice that Kurt is wearing two covers, a pair of shorts or swim trunks and a leopard skin loincloth. But where on the island did he find a leopard, and how did a boy like that manage to kill and skin him? The girls have moved out to build their own huts. In this scene, Gilligan says he doesn't know much about women, to which Mr. Howell adds, "Neither do I, and I've been married to one for 22 years. However, the inset image shows the community hut scene where Lovey says they have been married for only 20 years. This little gaffe will return again in Season 2. Ah, the natives are restless tonight. An interesting choice for a South Sea native, a blue-eyed white guy. But hey, he obviously comes from a more advanced tribe, as the efforts of the tribal witch doctor will attest. Look at all of those beautifully set golden teeth." Here we see Gilligan at the end of the Wrong Way Feldman episode. The skipper laments, "Our hero didn't leave us much." Gilligan then says, "Oh yes, he did. I got his wings." But when Wrong Way returns, he has his old outfit on with the wings still attached. In order to agitate Wrong Way, Gilligan starts eating an apple, and he then gives the skipper a whole stalk of celery. He gets all this from a brown paper bag. Now come on, if they are stranded on an island with no boats, no lights, no motor car, not a single luxury, and it's primitive as can be, you can't have a crewman run out to the local grocer for an apple and celery, and then just leave the grocery bag in the hut for Gilligan to use. After all, Gilligan crunching on a pineapple, rind and all, and the skipper smacking two coconuts together to get a nightcap before sleeping would have been just as funny, maybe even more so. Here we have Gilligan percussing on his percussion instrument. Lovey decides to form an orchestra, and the skipper decides he will be the conductor. After all, I led the Navy band aboard my destroyer for 2 years, and for 2 years in a row we almost got honorable mention. Well, that got me started thinking about the skipper's military career, and it's high time we set the record straight. You may recall the earlier episode where the skipper is sleepwalking, and he is dreaming about his days assigned to a sub-chaser, and the time at Guadalcanal where he converted the receiver into a transmitter. Now, a sub-chaser is not a destroyer. The inset image shows a sub-chaser, which was specifically made to hunt down German and Japanese subs. It is smaller, faster, and more maneuverable than a destroyer. Well, it's not too much of a stretch to suggest that the skipper served 2 different positions on 2 different classes of ships. But go back to the beginning of the Wrong Way Feldman episode. The professor laments that none of them knows how to fly an airplane. Marianne says she knew a crop duster, and Ginger says she once dated a pilot. Gilligan then suggests that they have plenty of experience between them, as the skipper was on an aircraft carrier. The skipper then says, "A lot of good that'll do, Gilligan. I was a cook." So now the skipper was a cook on an aircraft carrier. But that's not all. In the episode where the skipper has amnesia, the professor has hypnotized the skipper, hoping he'll remember being on the island, but the skipper believes he is on an island during World War II. So he captures Marianne and Ginger, who he thinks are Japanese soldiers, and he picks up the radio, trying to use it as a transmitter, and he starts his report by saying, "This is the CO of the 177th Infantry." Infantry? It's time to press on, but I will revisit this topic in Season 2. Here's Gilligan with his Dear Diary in his back pocket. It says so right on the cover. But on more than one occasion in this episode, we see a book that has no writing on its cover. Marianne and Ginger are about to enter the scene with bowls of crab and pineapple to feed Gilligan with. You can't see anything where the oval is marked, but you can if you watch this scene on DVD. Marianne and Ginger are standing there for several seconds just waiting for their cue to enter the scene. Alan Hale once said he patterned the skipper after Oliver Hardy. On more than one episode, Skipper and Gilligan try an old vaudeville joke, but they always manage to blow it. The skipper says, "I haven't had food for 3 days." He is supposed to say, "I haven't tasted food for 3 days," so the comic can reply, "Don't worry, it still tastes the same." It seems that the great Raftini has lost his crate of gear as the skipper and Gilligan are pulling it ashore. But the prop department messed this crate up. It's acceptable that it's empty, but they fouled up by not putting a back on it, so as you can see, light is seeping between the front boards. This is really unacceptable, as one only needs to tape over the gaps between the boards from the inside, or cover the inside front with black roofing paper. G. Thurston Howell IV doesn't want to be G. Thurston Howell IV, so he punches the skipper in the gut and then tells dear old Dad that they own the minnow now. He won it in a card game. But there isn't a minnow. It fell to pieces earlier. Finally, Harold J. Stone appears as Alexander Gregor Dubov, the greatest painter in the whole wide world. This scene is shot near the lagoon, but from a different vantage point. The only problem with this angle is that it exposes in the background a distant Southern California ridge. This ridge has got to be at least 2 or 3 miles away. Oh well, maybe that part of the small island is an unexplored part that Wrongway Feldman flew over earlier. Well, that's it for Season 1. Please feel free to view my other 2 Gilligan's Islands clips of Seasons 2 and 3, and by all means, check out my other YouTube videos. Thank you and see you later.